in terms of what does give me hope, the underlying resilience of the natural world itself is something that I get great hope from. If you think of individual animals that might be doomed, it's very easy to just despair. But if you think about the ecosystem as a whole, something will survive. And that thing will be beautiful in some way.
Hello and welcome to the Lodgecast, a nature and wildlife podcast brought to you by the Beaver Trust. I'm Sophie Pavelle.
And I'm Eva Bishop. Each episode we bring you the latest news from the Beaver Trust as we welcome beavers back to our rivers to restore our countryside and create resilient landscapes.
And we also explore the state of nature in the UK and speak to fascinating experts and inspiring individuals along the way.
Today, we're joined by Emily Knight, a renowned broadcast journalist, producer and presenter of some of the BBC's most popular nature radio shows and podcasts.
Greetings, Eva. Here we are at episode 4 of our third series on the Lodgecast. Where does the time go?
I don't know. It's been such fun, though. It's a fantastic series. I'm really excited about it all. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks. Yeah, caffeinated and raring to go, and really excited for this week's episode because we're talking all about science communication. Which
it's right up your street.
Right up my street, yeah, and yours, I believe. I mean, you know.
Let's dive straight in then. Yeah.
Let's do
science
it.
communication, podcasts, broadcasting, the whole lot. It's really, really fascinating. What was your path into science communication?
Well, it was slightly accidental, as I've told you before. It was kind of it was a discipline and an area of work and an industry that I just wasn't familiar with at all. It's so new and it's so exciting and it's so dynamic and fast paced.
Well, it is new, isn't it? The concept of a degree in science communication is new.
Exactly.
So that wasn't around when I was at university back in the day.
Just a mere 5 years ago,
back
surely.
To the 1800s.
No, I mean, when I was doing zoology, I was in my final year and I was going through all different phases of I want to be a doctor, I want to be a dentist, I want to be a vet, I want to be a pilot, blah, blah, blah. You know, all the usual things. And then just some sort of late night, probably wine-fueled hunt around on Google, suddenly came across this Masters in Science Communication at UWE, and then I discovered that just a handful of other universities in the country also offer a Masters in Science Communication. I was like, what is this? Science and communication? Don't we do that already? And what was amazing is that we kind of haven't. And it's kind of now, I guess, in the era of social media and amazing TV and podcasts and radio, the need for a middleman to translate hard academic complex topics to make sense and be relevant to your everyday person who has everyday stuff to deal with and think about is so vital. I mean, what does science communication mean to you?
Well, you've just completely scuppered my next question, actually, which was...
sorry.
No, it's good. You've answered it. So it was going to be, what is the difference between talking about a subject and science communication? And I think you've just answered it in that what you're doing is translating scientific fact, into something that everyone can understand, anyone can understand, and that means something to them in their frame of reference, which is quite interesting. What was your question?
Well, my question is, and we've talked about this, I guess, off the record before, but would you consider yourself a science communicator?
No, I don't. No, I don't. But
see, I find that so interesting.
But I think it's only because it's a thing. It hasn't been a thing for me. I haven't taken it as a career step, I guess. That's the difference.
But just because I've got a degree on paper that says science communication doesn't necessarily mean I'm a science communicator. I would argue that as communications director of an environmental/climate charity, Beaver Trust, that you do science communication every single day.
Yeah, and I do. I mean, that's absolutely true, but I'd never have that as one of the things that I am, which is interesting in itself.
That is really interesting. Because I would immediately label you as a science. We're doing it now, this podcast.
Label.
As comms director, what interested you about giving a Beaver Trust podcast the green light?
Well, partly prompted by your enthusiasm for it, but your understanding of the podcast space, harassment, and something that we can dive into with Emily, our guest, later. Because I knew little about the podcast world actually before we started looking into it, but it's clearly such an important way to reach a huge amount of people these days.
Yeah.
And to get information across in small segments. And I think that our first couple of series, and certainly this one as well, have started to prove that. So we've covered some amazing topics, and we've done it through the science communication, the presenting of scientific fact, as well as fun, as well as with an authority on the subject.
The fact
and created these the fact of, with one exception, in this slightly embarrassing series 3 moment. But I think we've really shown that. So it's been, people, the medium of audio these days is so popular. And if you can create sort of half-hour nuggets where people can learn a lot and really enjoy it, it's a fantastic way to do that.
Yeah.
But that's something that I'd really like to put to Emily as well, is explore the world of podcasts with her and where it could go.
Yeah. And one question I really want to ask you is, why do you think beavers are a unique science communication tool? And if so, why?
I've just got an image of a beaver as a tool, like a physical...
A spanner. Tip is such a tool. Anyway.
They are a huge science communication opportunity, definitely.
Nice.
There is a lot that needs to be communicated well and with scientific rigour behind it, but at the same time debunking myths and, because they are this mythical thing because they haven't been in our landscape for so long. And so people don't quite know what to expect, and therefore inevitably rumours will start, as well as because they're such complex and impactful creatures, there is a lot to learn. So there's a definite need for science communication on beavers where there might not be on other creatures, and their keystone impacts and their landscape transformation, all that kind of stuff. It really demands science communication, which is why communications generally is so critical for beaver trust.
Yeah.
As we welcome beavers back to our rivers to restore our countryside and create resilient landscapes.
Said that one before.
If you will. But they're also a really exciting way to do it because they're really engaging as creatures, and there's so much that you can talk about. So much. You can take any angle with a beaver, and it's brown and furry.
Wow. Okay.
Shall I stop? Have you done podcasting before? You're very good at it.
Oh, thank you. No, I haven't. But I mean, I've been an audio nerd for as long as I can remember. I was obsessed with story tapes and audiobooks when I didn't really listen to music growing up. I just listened to story tapes, and Radio 4 has been the background to my life, really. And so, my parents just always have it on in the background, and it's such a comfort for me, and I've learnt so much. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to chat to Emily, because she works for the place that I grew up to, in a way, Radio 4 and all these things. But no, I haven't done a podcast before, but I can definitely appreciate, and even since I finished studying, podcasts have just boomed. And again, that's something that I think we'll get into with Emily.
Yeah. I think taking science communication to the next level, the obvious next step for me. So the climate emergency demands really, really strong science communication. And it's a really interesting subject, I think, if you start to look at that, which we won't now because we don't have a massive amount of time. But if you segment the population, you need to communicate it in different ways, and you need to use science communication to engage on all sorts of different levels. And it's absolutely fascinating, I think, if you start to look into that.
You can go wrong with it. You can go drastically wrong with it. And I think that it's such a responsibility to be that middleman and to have that microphone and to be the one relaying these vital messages, because, you don't know who you're going to be speaking to and what people are going to be really digesting. And so if you haven't done your research and you haven't spoken to the right people and you haven't understood the context in which a massive piece of new data has been discovered within, then, you could be doing more damage than good in terms of education. So we do have such a responsibility, and it's such an exciting time to be in science communication at the moment.
It is. It is. So should we speak to the lady with the microphone and that responsibility?
Oh, yes, please. So we are so excited to have the amazing Emily Knight with us for this episode. Now, she calls herself a radio ladio on Twitter, which we highly respect her for, and quite rightly, because she's responsible for incredible BBC earfood like NatureBang, Extinction Tapes for Radio 4, and of course the BBC Earth podcast. She's one of our favourite people to listen to, and we are thrilled that you are about to join us in chatting with her.
Emily Knight, what a treat to have you on our podcast. Such a podcast supremo. Welcome to the Lodgecast.
Hello, lovely to be here. Thanks so much.
Oh, now, first of all, Emily, we need you to do the vital task of judging our beaver fact off. So essentially, Eva and I will both share with you our favourite beaver fact of the week, and you get to decide, totally subjectively, which fact you think is better or more interesting. It's totally up to you. So,
Okay.
I'm going to kick off. Beavers can wrestle. So, a photographer called Colin Black fairly recently captured very rare footage of two beavers in Tayside in Scotland, neck deep, literally neck deep in the river, completely at it, using their forepaws like boxing gloves at each other. And so my fact is that beavers are not always cute and cuddly, and there's a lot more to their behaviour than we care to admit. So beavers are wrestlers.
Brilliant.
Wrestlers. Okay, that is interesting. Do we know why they were fighting?
We don't know why those two are fighting. I imagine they had a little bit of a disagreement about a lady, let's say, maybe.
I read something recently that they actually enjoy the play of it, actually. I might have imagined that, science communication.
Bit of a curveball.
Curveball in there.
I mean, if they're doing it for playing, then we've come right back round to cute again, and you're going to struggle to best
have.
that fact.
Yeah,
Really.
so I forget I said that.
Damn. Cheers, Eva. Come on, then.
Can I have half a point if you win? Here's my fact, which I think is really exciting, actually. Not exciting, but interesting. So you imagine a beaver pond, and they build their dams, and they store lots of water, and it sucks into the countryside, and that's really, really vital for our waterways. But the depth of water storage is also important to the beaver. So they will dig down as well as just allow the water to accumulate. And it serves two purposes. One is that so that there is deeper water below the frost line so that they can keep doing their stuff and keep moving around. And secondly, so the predators can't hunt them in shallower water. They can hunt in shallow water, but they'll be safe in deeper water where wolves, cougars, etc. can't stand. So I think they're really cunning in, sculpting their ponds to serve a couple of purposes.
Okay, that's a good fact. Well, do you have like some kind of countdown, deliberation time clock, or do I just have to make a judgment straight in?
Boo, quick, decide.
Okay, my instincts are them having a wrestle is a delightful mental image, and I'm enjoying it very much. But I don't think that's that uncommon for an animal, right? Whereas I think, Eva, you've given me a fact which is unique to beavers, and I think, although I was very, very close to being persuaded, but I think I'm going to have to go for the digging out a deep hole. That's very clever. Also, I really like the idea of some kind of predatory animal trying to get to the beaver and just getting out of its depth and panicking and getting out of the water. That sounds
cool,
great.
Isn't it? I still think it's just amazing that they're acting as if wolves and cougars are still in our landscape. That's what's so fun. Amazing.
Yeah, well, maybe they're seeing us with our long legs and thinking, I'm gonna go deep. We need to be at least 6 foot deep because these guys are tall.
Beware the wild swimmers.
Oh,
Thank you.
Fair enough.
Honoured.
Well done. Good one. Right, Emily, you are a broadcast journalist, and these days you're most likely to be found working both behind and in front of the mic for BBC Radio 4 and other outlets. But first and foremost, we must ask the obvious here on the Lodgecast. What is your connection with our favourite beavers?
Well, what could I describe myself as a keen amateur in relation to beavers? They're amazing animals.
This is a safe space to do so.
They are amazing animals. I can't say that I knew a huge amount about them until I made a programme about them, which happened. I made the programme over the course of the last year, but it was covering the beaver reintroduction at Pavelle Farm in Cornwall of the delightfully named Sigourney Beaver and Jean-Claude Van Damme. And I was making a programme about the family there, Merlin and Robin, who have been doing some rewilding projects on their land, and the beavers were a big part of their rewilding project. And actually, that's how I found the story, which turned out to be a really big human story about Robin getting COVID and the family recovering together. But the initial starting point for it was a colleague actually spotted, I think, a tweet about this beaver release and said, Emily, you have to look at this. There's a beaver called Sigourney Beaver being released in Cornwall. She knew that it would be right up my street, so I started looking at it, and then just found out more and more about the whole process. The whole programs of reintroductions across the country, and I just have been slightly obsessed with them ever since. I mean, the capacity they have for sort of world building is incredible.
What was most surprised you about beavers, do you think?
Well, I think I always knew that they built lodges and things. I think most of my knowledge of beavers came from the serious documentary Lady and the Tramp. I don't know if you remember that one. But, there is a beaver character in that does a lot of serious woodworking and helps them out.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, I think he cuts off Tramp's muzzle at some point, but you also see him chopping down wood and stuff. So I didn't really know that much about them at all. But I mean, I think from having worked with Merlin Hambry-Tennyson over at Kabila and having had him talk in such excited terms about the beavers, he told me that they look like they are often sort of bleeding from the mouth, but it's not blood, it's rust, because they've got such high iron content in their teeth. Because they have to be so strong that they have this sort of slightly gruesome looking bloody mouth occasionally, but it's not blood at all, it's rust. And I was like, they've got iron teeth. It's amazing.
Yeah. Emily, we often ask some of our guests whether they have, we've coined this phrase, lost their beaverginity, i.e. seen a beaver for the first time. Have you lost your beaverginity? Did you see a beaver when you were making that programme?
I saw beaver tracks. I saw the stumps of trees that had clearly been gnawed by a beaver. I saw the drag marks that they had been dragging trees. I did not see a beaver. Ooh. I still have my beaver virginity intact.
Yet to lose it. Well, we hope you lose it soon, because it's very exciting.
Yeah. Well, I've recently seen that there are beavers in the Avon now. Obviously, I'm based in Bristol, so really not too far away from me. So there's hope for me, I think. I could maybe see a beaver.
Definitely. Get out hunting. It's amazing. It's really, really exciting.
Best of luck, yeah.
But taking it back to the start, how did you get to be making such amazing science and nature content for national radio? How did it all come about?
Oh gosh, I feel so lucky to be, I've only really ever had sort of two passions in life. One of them was radio, and I've always loved speech radio. I was one of these kids that was raised on Radio 4. And I've always loved natural history.
Hey, same.
I was a real Attenborough nerd sitting there watching all of the, Attenborough documentaries as a kid. So I feel incredibly lucky to have been sort of thrust into this niche where I'm really doing exactly what I want to be doing. It really all started. So I've been working for Radio 4, making documentaries here in Bristol for coming on for about 10 years. And I'd made all kinds of things. When you're at the start, you make anything that anyone will let you make, really, all kinds of different factual stuff. And the real twist where I got to start working more with natural history came when the BBC released Blue Planet 2, the big, natural history series. And we were commissioned in this department. And do you remember that? We were commissioned to make a podcast about it. And I was, really, really luckily, I got assigned to it as producer. And then there just came a moment where we were like, okay, we don't really have a budget for a presenter for this programme. So me and the other producer, my colleague Becky Ripley, they were sort of, they were looking around for who we could get and, who would be able to do it really quickly and who would be able to turn it around, in the time we needed. And they thought, well, why don't you guys just present it? And it was a real leap of faith because, I had presented stuff in news broadcasting before, but I'd not really done any presenting in that kind of sense, where you're putting your personality in it. I hadn't really done anything like that. And it was a real learning curve. But it went down really well. People really liked that podcast. And since then, Becky and I have done various things. We make a series on Radio 4 called NatureBang, which is all about sort of
big
merging
fans
of the...
over here.
Yeah, okay.
It's so good.
It's a really fun programme to make. And I also make a series called the BBC Earth podcast, which is also about nature. So, once I was given the opportunity to get my teeth into working a little bit with natural history, I just sort of ran towards it. And now here I am, really.
Amazing. I think we'd like to quiz you a little bit on your podcast expertise and where that whole world could go. But I'd like to ask first, how do you think broadcast priorities have changed recently in response to the growing interest and awareness of the climate crisis, if at all?
Gosh, that's a really interesting question. I would say, actually, the biggest changes, I think you sort of, if you look at the big blue chip BBC TV shows, there's been a real marked change between, the days when people were just very, very timid about the idea of giving any kind of moral message behind the programmes. And when that moral message started sneaking in and the world started being more receptive to it. And now there is always a moral message to those things. I mean, it would feel ridiculous to put those programmes out without saying, everything we've showed you so far is in terrible danger and we have to do something about it. I'm not sure if the podcast world has quite done that same journey, simply because podcasting came in so much later. And I feel like there has always been quite a strong narrative in the podcast world about conservation. I mean, you do hear those conversations happening in the podcast world. So I don't think the podcast world has been quite so, I don't want to use the word timid, but just has been quite so cautious about a conservation message. I guess it's partly because with a podcast as well, you have to, your audience are subscribers. So if you have a podcast that is themed around conservation, the people who are listening are already sort of
That's it, isn't it?
It's kind of signed up. Yeah. I mean, Emily, we must talk about how ridiculously popular audio content has become since the pandemic, especially. I mean, some studies suggested it soared by like 76% in the last couple of years. Why do you think this is? Do you think people are looking to podcasts and radio for escapism or for education? And I guess sort of tacked on to that, how seriously should we, I guess, all in this call now as science communicators start taking this hunger for audio content?
Gosh, well, I mean, it's one of the nice things about working for the BBC is you do occasionally get people who are responsible for all the data. They come and they tell you why they think people listen to podcasts. So I can tell you what we're told. I mean, it does seem to be that there is a particular relationship from audio that gives you a sense of intimacy that television doesn't. There's no screen in the way of you and what you're experiencing. It's going right there into your head. There's a real hunger, I think, for storytelling. And I think you can sort of go back to our ancestral past and think about the way we used to tell each other stories, and it would have been that sort of that stereotype of sitting around a campfire and hearing someone tell you stories, and that just chimes much better with the podcast world, I think, than television or movies, because you can sort of get on with your ordinary life. You can be doing the washing up, or you can be driving somewhere, and you can have someone sort of in your head telling you stories, and I think that's a really lovely way to experience the world. And so I think that could explain why people are getting more and more into podcasts. I mean, particularly in the pandemic when everyone's been so lonely, that craving for sort of an intimate connection with someone who's going to, tell you comforting stories, or even awful doom scrolling. There's a lot of news podcasts out there, which are also quite a good way of keeping up with the world without feeling like you have to view it all. So
it's actually companionship, isn't it? Because it's got the personal edge. That's what you're getting at.
And lack of distraction. Yeah.
Amazing.
And what role do you see podcasts and the things that you make, and then also the sort of potential for this medium and platform playing in helping the climate and biodiversity crisis and getting more people connected to nature?
Well, so that's, I mean, any way that you can communicate a message is going to help, right? Any way that you can get a message out to people. I suppose one of the problems with podcasting is that we sort of mentioned before, this idea that if you're listening to a podcast, it's because you found it and you've already subscribed to it. So in a sense, the people who are going to be listening to conservation-themed podcasts are people who are already bought in, right? They're already signed up to the idea that we need to get busy with conservation. They're already on your side. Getting the message to cross the divide, I think, is really hard. And I'm not sure it's a problem that podcasting can by itself solve. But I mean, in terms of what I do, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I'm making really is about instilling an idea of joy in the natural world. And I think that's a lot of what a lot of television that's concerned with the natural world does. It's just look at it, just experience the wonder of these things and these places and these animals and these behaviours that you could never really have understood, without someone telling you. And I think that has got to be step one in getting people interested in preserving the natural world. The slightly more political side of how exactly we do that, it's difficult. That's not something that I work on quite as much. Although I have done, I mean, in the department that I work in Bristol, we make a documentary series called Costing the Earth, which is sort of the BBC's flagship environmentalism podcast. And I've made a few episodes of that over my time. And that's been around for a long time.
Yeah. And the stuff you produce for Radio 4 has an awesome balance of information and humour. What's your process for finding the gold in the stories that you produce? And no doubt some species lend themselves a lot easier to innuendo than others. Beavers.
I think you've just got to go with your instinct, haven't you? I mean, if it makes me laugh, then I can assume that I can translate like what it is that I'm finding funny to other people. I was given a tip very early in my career by someone who's like, if you can get yourself to the position where you're making programs basically just for you, then you'll probably make better programs. And it's a real luxury to be able to do it.
That's a really good, yeah. And so I'm imagining you sat there behind the mic chuckling away to yourself as you're recording and rehearsing. I suppose that's a good sign, yeah?
Yeah, a certain amount of that. I mean, there is, when I make the stuff with Becky Ripley, there is we're both really conscious that we're having a lot of fun in studio, and that can sound great or it can sound really self-indulgent. And, so you have to make sure that
but it works so well. It works so well.
True. I feel that when we talk about our eggs here.
In joke.
The point is, like, if you're having more fun than your audience, then you need to rein it in. But if you can bring your audience with you and like translate why you're having so much fun to them, then it can work.
It's clever.
But ultimately, so you can't be making stuff that you're like, academically, I think probably this will make people laugh. It has to be something that makes you laugh. Otherwise, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think ultimately, you want to, as a listener, feel like that you're just overhearing a conversation with a couple of mates, or you're just kind of a fly on the wall on a very chilled out conversation, and you feel very part of that group. And I think that's something that you and Becky especially do really well.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. So if we do it well, I'm delighted.
I imagine that, especially pre-COVID, when we were able to be out and about a bit more, that you have a fair few anecdotes that involve wielding a microphone in a far-flung location. Do you have any of those that you'd care to share?
Ooh, well, I mean, you might be surprised. I don't go out to these far-flung locations as often as I would like to. I mean, when I'm making the BBC Earth podcast, I'm mostly speaking to people who have been to these amazing far-flung locations. And they're mostly telling me about and then I go back to the studio and I make this wonderful sound-rich world. I'm doing a portrait of a jungle that I've never been to. But I mean, I'm very lucky that I've been to. So I made a series a few years ago now called Planet Puffin, where we got to spend a breeding season on the Isle of May, which is an island just off the coast of Scotland. I mean, we weren't there for the whole season. Obviously, we went up a few times to see key moments in the breeding season, but that was a real treat. I mean, the Isle of May is a place that you can visit on sort of day trips. You can go on a boat and stay there for a day, have a picnic, get a look at some puffins, and then you can go home. But getting to stay overnight on the Isle of May is something that mostly only the seabird researchers get to do. And we got to stay overnight, and we got to, experience what it must be like for them staying there, day in, day out through awful weather and beautiful weather on this island. And we got to do the stuff that they get to do as well. I mean, we got to ring puffins. We got to go out and grovel, which is where you put your entire arm like up to the shoulder down into this.
Is that what it's called?
It's called groveling, yeah.
Oh, okay. Not sort of go and say 1,000 apologies to a puffin.
No, exactly. I mean, we were doing that too. I mean, what you do when you do your groveling and you reach your arm down into this burrow and you feel a bird. I mean, I can see why they call it groveling, because I was just going, I'm so sorry. You don't want this.
Really?
You don't want this arm just coming into your world. That I promise you, this is for your own benefit in some way that you will never understand. But I really don't mean to just squeeze you like this. But it's for checking whether there's an egg. So you sort of have to nudge the bird out of the way just to see if there's an egg under them, and then you monitor it, and then you can. Yeah, I just want to have a little feel of your eggs. I'm sorry.
I feel like it's a very British. It would bring out the Britishness in everybody.
So sorry.
Yeah. Just excuse me. I'm terribly sorry. I won't be a minute. Thank you so much. You sort of leave a digestive biscuit behind as a thank you.
Yes. Milk and sugar. Oh, nice.
Moving slightly sideways, something that interests us here is to how basically women in the workplace, in a nutshell. So you are a young woman in a totally competitive industry, broadcast journalism. How do you navigate that space? Have you found any challenges with it, or has it not really ever been a problem to you? Or, what's your take on that world?
Oh, interesting. I mean, so for me personally, the department that I work in here in Bristol is like 80% women. So it hasn't been a huge barrier for me personally. But I mean, I've also, there have been various institutions that are concerned with helping women get on in broadcasting. I mean, there's one called Sound Women West, which is about women who are, who maybe need a leg up in broadcasting getting together. I haven't been particularly involved in that, so maybe that's not one to really talk about. Because I get invited to these things and I just think, well, I don't think my gender personally has ever really held me back. I mean, I'm very supportive of the idea that it is holding women back and that, there is more that the industry needs to do. But I mean, this particular facet, this tiny little corner of the industry that I work in is not particularly, I mean, there's just lots of women working here.
Well, that's lovely to hear. And hopefully we'll hear that more and more as years go by. So yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Emily, what podcast do you enjoy listening to?
Ooh, do you know what? I tend to go in waves. I'll get completely obsessed with something and listen to the whole thing. So I've just listened to a podcast that's been around for years now, but it's been on my to listen list for ages and ages, which is West Cork, which is it's a sort of true crime podcast. But I mean, when I say true crime, I get a sort of slight shiver of revulsion because
Emma's just lit up.
Oh really? I have to say, I'm not a massive fan of true crime. There are some true crime stories that I'm just like, oh, it's all just about murdered women, and you have to hear a whole episode about how beautiful she was before you can get to the criminals. And I'm not really that into that. But there have been a few. So West Cork is really interesting because it's more about the process, the sort of the interesting process of how a crime is prosecuted and what happens when someone's accused of a crime and there isn't enough evidence, and what happens to the community around the person who is accused of a crime. It's really interesting. It's got some really interesting sociology sort of behind it. It's more about this community really than it is about the crime. And so I loved that. I mean, that's been around for a few years now and it won a load of awards, but it took me ages to get to listen to it. What else do I listen to? I mean, I hate to tout the work of my own colleagues, but there's a programme from the BBC called Soul Music that my colleagues here make. And it's just nice lovely. Well, it's basically every episode takes a particular song and then they find people who this song has been a real part of their life. Like this is the song that they were listening to when something, really incredible happened in their life, or this song means something to them for some particular reason. So it's
I feel like everyone could relate to that in some way as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it makes you think of, which of the songs that I would...
Nostalgic. Well, it's like whenever you listen to Desert Island Disc, you're like, these are my 8 tracks.
Exactly.
By the way.
Yeah. So I'm really fond of them. I have to say, I do listen to a lot of sort of daily news podcasts, which aren't particularly interesting to talk about, but it is a good way to get the news.
Nice. Where do you think podcasting might go eventually? How far are we on its journey?
Oh, goodness. So I read an article just yesterday that says that it is getting harder and harder to have what you would call a podcast hit, because there are now so many podcasts. I mean, the podcast audience is growing and growing and growing, but each individual podcast is getting less and less traction actually year on year. So you've got these really big budget shows that are being put out into the world and they're just not managing to get the same. I mean, all of this time and production effort and money is being spent on these shows that will never get one tiny tenth of the percentage of the Joe Rogan podcast. Do you know what I mean? So it sort of moves in directions that you wouldn't necessarily predict. But I think it's still going to grow. I think the growth model is not slowing down anytime soon. It's just a question of whether it grows in a way, I wouldn't be too surprised if I saw really the big production companies slightly reducing the quantity of stuff that they're making and really focusing on just a few things. Because, you can't listen to everything. I mean, it's completely overwhelming now looking at a podcast.
It is. It's difficult to choose, to what to give your time to. And I agree. I think often it's best to just really invest yourself in one podcast at a time and really get into that. Emily, our theme for this series of the Lodgecast is hope. And we've been asking each of our guests who are involved in one way or another with the natural world or science communication or scientific research, with you and your work and just the process of what it takes to build a natural history programme, what gives you hope in 2022 for our natural world in particular?
That's a really hard one because I slightly struggle with that myself, I have to say. I mean, it is quite hard to imagine that we're going to be able to turn the corner. There are various programmes that I've heard which are laying out the sort of the route to salvation, or the various little things that we could be doing, or even the various big things, the things that would give him hope. I mean, point your listeners towards a great series called 39 Ways to Save the Planet. Which
I listened to a bit of that. It's great.
And there's some really great solutions in there. And you hear that, and by the end of it, you're like, yes, we're going to do it. We're going to turn the corner. I get really dispirited by just sort of the political lack of will. It seems sort of unfightable. But I mean, in terms of what does give me hope, the underlying resilience of the natural world itself is something that I get great hope from. I mean, I'm reading a book at the moment which is about geology and the several times that our planet has gone through mass extinction events and has sort of come out on top. If you think of individual animals that might be doomed, it's very easy to just despair. But if you think about the ecosystem as a whole, something will survive. And that thing will be beautiful in some way. And that, I know that's a very small crumb of hope in a way, but, the natural world is not going to be defeated by us. It is just going to be massively, massively changed by us. And that's sad. But, there will always be elements of it that survive.
Thank you.
That is a very heartrending note to finish on. But it'll leave our listeners with lots to think about. Thank you so much, Emily, for your time today. It's been fascinating to talk to you about podcasting and the world of broadcasting and where it all might go. Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Whoa. Head spinning.
Totally. New angles for us to actually consider podcasting and broadcasting and being in people's ears and why that matters to them. But amazing lady. She's doing such great stuff and so humble about her career, and it's great. Amazing.
Yeah, she is. No, it's really interesting to chat to someone else about sort of, as she was saying when we finished the call, the mechanics of podcasting and how you sort of don't tend to really think about it. You're just sort of obsessing over the content and the jokes and the facts and everything, but actually the how you do it and why you're doing it and what's motivating it, and whether your priorities for generating this content align with the priorities of the planet is a really interesting one to mull over.
Well, fantastically, it is now time for the quiz. So, Emma, will you step on in and
step out of your box.
Adopt the
Quizmaster
seat.
This bloody box. Yeah, I'm here, but I'm ready to quiz you this time.
She's coming back with a vengeance out of the box.
In your face.
Payback for keeping me locked in there.
Well, we're having some sort of social services ringing us, being like, is she all right?
This quiz, I was thinking about it over the Christmas break. I thought, what can I ask you guys?
Invested.
Yeah.
Well, it's because I was doing a lot of reading over the Christmas break, and I thought, hey,
healthy.
I know that you two also both really enjoy a good book, a good nature book.
Here we go.
Oh, crap.
I don't like where this is going.
Well, so this is Name the Animal, Complete the Book Title.
Oh.
So I'm going to give you a book title
there.
Cool quiz.
with a missing animal. What we're going to try. And it's going to be the first person that shouts out the right one. But if you can't find them, I have got options of 3. Okay, question 1. Where the Watts sing?
Oh, crawdads. Where do crawdads sing? Yes, mate.
Sophie. Very nice point to Sophie.
Nice work.
Thanks. Best book ever. The perfect book.
I haven't started reading it yet, but it's a mixture of crime novel and a celebration of nature, right? And these are my 2 favourite things.
It is the perfect book. I cannot stress this enough.
I only recently found out what a crawdad was, and that was because I was Googling this, because spoken like a total fool, I was like, wow, obviously it's like some kind of raven. And then I Googled it and it's a crayfish, and I was like, okay. Cool. Didn't know that. Okay, book 2. The soul of a what?
No idea.
Oh,
or the soul of an what?
Can we have a clue, or shall we just guess?
You're welcome to guess, but I could give you choice of 3.
Yes, please.
Is it the soul of an earthworm? Is it the soul of an octopus? Or is it the soul of an eagle?
Ooh,
I
octopus.
was going to say octopus, but I'm going to say earthworm for a laugh.
It's octopus.
Well, of course.
Eva went straight in for the win.
I would like someone to write a book about the soul of an earthworm, though, because they are pretty fundamental.
Me too. Soil is so cool. So this was a surprising exploration into the wonder of consciousness by Cy Montgomery. The Old Man and the...
I don't know.
Can we have...
It's by Will Millard, if you know him.
No, sorry, Will.
Okay. Is it The Old Man and the Hedgehog? The Old Man and the Sand Eel? Or The Old Man and the Swallows?
Sand eel.
Old Man and the Swallows. Oh.
Sand Eel. It was Sand Eel.
Is it? Yeah. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
It's a book about
Why?
about
Why
fishing
is it
and
that,
about
Bill?
3 generations of men trying to figure out what it means to be a man, a father, and a fisherman.
Crikey,
it's-
that's a good one.
Cracking quiz, though.
there
What a
we
great
go.
idea.
I love that quiz. Really creative. Enjoyed that a lot.
Really creative.
So
Teacher's
creative.
write up. Really creative.
Well done, Eva. Well done, Eva.
A big gold star goes to you.
I'll stick it on the door of my cage as I climb back into my box.
Off you go now.
Great quiz. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Emma. And that's it for this episode of the Lodgecast.
Tune in again next week as we're joined by Beaver researcher Sam Gandy, who recently published a paper looking at the psychological benefits of beaver wetlands.
In fact, make sure you've subscribed to the Lodgecast on your podcast platform of choice so that you don't miss any of them.
And for more from Beaver Trust, don't forget that you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Beaver Trust. So head over to our website, beavertrust.org, and also sign up to our free newsletter.
Don't forget that to celebrate this series, we're giving away a few copies of Derek Gow's book, Bringing Back the Beaver. Well worth a read, all about introducing beavers to the UK.
So for your shot at getting a copy, all you have to do is post about how much you love the Lodgecast by tagging at Beaver Trust and using hashtag #TheLodgecast on Twitter or Instagram, or you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and email us a screen grab of it so that we know it was you, and email it over to info@beavertrust.org.
We've been loving seeing all the entries so far, so keep them coming and we will announce the winners at the end of the series.
See you next week.
This podcast, as always, is a mixture of fact and opinion. It was hosted by Sophie Pavelle and Eva Bishop. It was produced and edited by Emma Brisdion for Beaver Trust.